And then the other thing about time that your work so beautifully dovetails with is it's like, well, it's true. No day is the same in a 28 or 30-day cycle, right? And so it's like, if we really get into relationship with our bodies and with time, then we can start to see how doing different things at different moments makes so much more sense. And so productivity just has this new meaning. Like we can go back to the original meaning. Like I feel like productivity has become to mean that we're always doing stuff, we're always busy. But like the original meaning of productivity, like if you have a productive farm, the farm rested, right? Like that's like part of it. And so we can start to actually be in relationship with time in a way that makes sense. And then what happens is we really feel like we're bending it on a more regular basis. We're like, whoa, like, how did I do that so quickly? And it's just because we're in alignment.
All right, Mia, I am so excited to have you here and so excited to dive in with you. I know I was on your podcast recently talking about flow from this more biological perspective. And it's funny, we both use that word flow so much in what we do. And I really like it. Like it makes it like, I wish more women were talking about how we create this flow in our life and in our rhythms. And so we're going to dive into what that means, what that looks like, how we can create more of that ease and flow in our time and our schedule, in our lives, like while we're juggling all the different things that we're juggling and how we can do it all really effectively and well. So thanks so much for hopping on the podcast.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. So I don't know that I know this. So I would love to know a little bit about your journey and your story and like how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I have always been an entrepreneur. I think I had a job for like a year and a half after graduating college. But I was not a coach. I was a graphic designer actually by trade. I went to art school. Actually, my first day of business, unfortunately, was like the real day of 9/11. So that was my first day of business. It was before I had children, all the things. And my first client was the German consulate and I got locked in. So that was the beginning of my business journey. And so I had that business for about 10 years. And I actually had all my 3 kids while I was running that business. It was phenomenal, like blew my expectations of what I could create in life.
So cool.
And I had this experience one day where I was like taking in, like it was like 3:00 and I had my 3 kids. They were all under the age of probably 4.5. So I had 3 kids under the age of 4.5. My youngest was about 6 months or maybe a little bit older, maybe 8 months. And I just remember like staring across my desk at this stack of coffee cups and being like, okay, I have been to Starbucks 7 times since I arrived at work this morning and it's only 3:00 and I'm exhausted. And I pretty much checked out. Like, I just remember like going through all the things. Like I have these 3 beautiful kids. Like I was married and still am married to a guy I met in high school. Like I just felt like I had like done all the things. And in fact, I had like exceeded all the things because I hadn't always known I would have this business.
Yeah.
And I just felt so tired and so depleted. And I just like couldn't figure out what was next. So, you know, it was sort of a little bit of a tipping point. Like it was like the last straw. And I was just like, I have to get healthy, I think, because the one tangible thing I could figure was that I had in my pregnancies gained like 85 pounds and I hadn't lost it. Like I wasn't one of those people who nursed and then lost the weight. And so I was like, maybe that's it. But I also knew that like with 3 kids and a business and all the things, like I couldn't do that in the way that I had done it before. I had been pretty mean to my body in like seasons past. And I was like, I don't have the energy for that anymore. Like, and so I was like, I wonder what I can do. And I literally like looked across at the office at one of my business partners and was like, what would you do if you just needed to get healthy? And he was like, well, this new hot yoga studio opened up across the street. And this was before like yoga studios were at every corner, you know, it was, I guess 14 years ago at this point. And so it was like, if I had gone to yoga at that point, I had gone like in the basement of some like weird house. And so I went to the yoga studio and I just remember like, first of all, it was hot and awful. I will admit that. Yet there was something about it that just connected me to my body in a way that I don't think I had connected like ever. And I had my 3 kids like 100% naturally. Like, so I had connecting moments, but this was like even deeper. And I just really connected with the teacher. So I introduced myself, and she just basically became my first mentor of many. But that was the day where I was like, I have to come first in a different way. Like my body has to come first. Like something's not right. Like I'm not in my rhythm. Like I literally wasn't in the rhythm that I was supposed to be living in. I was contradicting it at every turn. And it wasn't like I was in burnout, basically. And so that pretty much kickstarted things. And then as a designer and an entrepreneur, it was just sort of like one thing led to another. Like I figured out the food pretty quickly was my first step. I tell people that when I figured out the food, it was like 10 years of therapy in 4 days. Like it was kind of unbelievable. And the food actually really connected me even more deeply to my rhythm, because I realized how I was self-soothing with food that was taking me out of my rhythm. And that led me to figuring out eventually I did not do this all at once. I kept it really simple. So I kept feeding my kids pretty much crap for a minute while I got myself back on in the right path. And then I figured out how to feed my kids. And that led to writing a book about food and family. And when I ended up taking my kids, this was probably 7 years ago. I took my kids out of school for a year and we went on a book tour together. So pre-COVID, all that. And it was so fun. And on the tour, I just kept getting asked over and over again, like, how do you make the time? How do you make the time? Like nobody cared how to make smoothies with kale, which is what, was part of what was in the book. Like everybody just wanted to know, like, well, how have you made time? Like, how did you make time to change your health? How have you made time to go on this trip? Like, how did you make time to write a book? Like all the things. And so that really became our focus my focus, my passion was how do we make time as women? And how have we been wrong about that really for a long time? And how do we get in right relationship with time and really leverage our wisdom? We have so much wisdom, which you have a big part of in your work.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. There's so much in there that I want to unpack. I would love, first off, like the first thing that I really want to dig into is you mentioned in there that your relationship with food and didn't realize like how much it was impacting your rhythms. So can you unpack that a little bit in terms of like what you learned about food? Because I do think this is one of those areas that most of us, like the information and the stuff that we're getting in terms of food is related to a diet culture. And not necessarily a nourishment culture. And so I would love for you to unpack a little bit. I know this is not like totally where you're at and where you're serving right now, but I think it's foundational to what you're doing is understanding like that body, right? And I was talking yesterday about like the whole body. It's both physical, it's mental, it's emotional. Like how do we nourish this whole body so that we can show up as our best? And that physical part does come from this place of food. So what did you find and what did you learn about the food that you were eating and how it impacted your rhythms and those shifts that you made initially?
Yeah. So I'm not going to prescribe any specific diet for anyone because I feel like, again, that is our problem in culture. So I ended up pretty much going like raw vegan was the step that I made. So it was pretty drastic from what I was. I literally at this point did not know how to cook. So I either got takeout for our family, got like Trader Joe's frozen food, or like if I was lucky, my husband, who is a good cook, would come home. But like if you had told me to go buy kale at that point, I probably would have cried when I got to Whole Foods and was like, but which one? Like I just wouldn't have, like I just had no understanding of food. So I had to keep it really simple. And basically what I did was I like infused everything with vegetables. Like I just had so many more vegetables than I was eating. So I will share that because I like that as a tactic instead of thinking of all the things you have to take out, really figuring like we only have so much space. And a lot of times when we're eating nourishing food, we don't have the cravings to fill space that doesn't need to be filled. And so really focusing on like, how do I eat more and more fruits and vegetables was super powerful, like mindset wise at that point. Still is, I would say, actually. Yeah. But one of the things I did let go at that time, and I've never looked back, is I did let go of gluten and dairy. And for me, for my body, that was like hugely important because what was happening, and I think we all have different versions of what this is for us. But basically, like the foods that weren't serving me were the ones that I was craving. And It was literally taking me out of my body. So I wasn't able to really understand what my body was asking of. It was like I wasn't in my body. So by just bringing the foods back as close as possible as I could to nature was, I think, really helpful in just keeping me grounded in that phase. And the other thing I'll say is that my diet these days is not quite as extreme as it was at that point. Like I needed that to draw a line in the sand personally in order to like experience this health transformation. But one of the things that did stick with me this whole time, well, the gluten and the dairy thing, but also just really sticking to my own guidelines about what's right for me, which I think is one of the hardest part for most people. It's like we go to a birthday party or a barbecue, and it's like we just think I would like really want to reiterate that part. We think we want what everyone's having. And it's because we carry these stories about this is what's fun. But what I really found out quickly is what's fun is being connected to my body. Like like that's the part that's like so enlightening, because culture hadn't led us in that direction before that, or hadn't led me in that direction before that point. And so if you would have told me to like pay attention to my cycle, well, first of all, that's another thing. I did not have a cycle before that point. So when I fixed my food, I actually got a regular cycle. So one of the big changes that happened, which were many, like I shed the weight, and I tell people like very like overnight, obviously it wasn't overnight, but it just wasn't a big deal because like I felt really good the whole time. But two things that shifted super quickly were I always took allergy medicine, and I didn't have allergies after that, like for like, seasonal stuff. And I got my period within 4 days of cleaning up my food. And I got it every 28 days after that. And I had taken medicine since I was 16 years old. Like I had never had a regular cycle before. So it really connected me to literally my cycle.
Yes. Well, and I think that this is so powerful too, because that is one of the questions I get asked a lot, is because I think there are a lot of women that are struggling with infertility or irregular cycles or like all of these things. And it comes down to like, in order for us to really leverage and use our cycle, we actually need to know what's happening to it. But it's this symbiotic relationship between our habits imposing on our cycle, and like what we're doing is changing the way our cycle shows up. And then the way our cycle is showing up is changing and shaping the way we feel and how we show up in the habits that we do. And so it's like, it's like the chicken or the egg, like sometimes it's like this, people are like, what do I focus on first? But it is true. Like there's so many habits that we have in our life that are impacting the way our cycle shows up. So if we were wanting to really embrace it and embody it and use it, like we got to look at all of those things that are helping to support it too. And I think that is huge. Thank you so much for that, because I think it is really valuable for people to hear. And I think even for me this week, we went to some friends' houses and they had ordered like Little Caesars pizza. And by the time we got home, I was like, oh my gosh, my stomach hurts so bad, like so bad. And I was like, anybody else in my house? And my oldest daughter, she's the same way. And like, she has a very sensitive stomach too, but she was like, my stomach hurts really bad. And I legit was like, I had diarrhea after eating Little Caesars pizza. And I was like, that did not go over well in my body. Like lesson learned, I'm not eating Little Caesars pizza ever again. But just those like small little things that we do and how they do make such a huge difference, and paying attention to what works well for our bodies and what doesn't, and what do we need, and not necessarily even subscribing to things that are quote unquote healthy, because we're all different, right? Like my body can't handle spinach, and spinach is like one of those top rated foods. Like everybody says, eat more spinach, but if I eat spinach, it does not go well. So it's like really learning and listening, like what are those foods for you that make such a huge difference and make such a huge impact. So thank you so much for saying that. The other thing I wanted to pick out of what you said in your intro story is this relationship to time, because it's a concept that I have become very familiar with, but I think it is one of those areas that maybe not everybody is thinking about. We talk about like the relationship we have with money. I talk about the relationship we have with our cycles, and also this relationship that we have with time, and that time isn't necessarily just this thing that exists, but that there's a relationship there, and that all of us experience time differently than somebody else. And that relationship and that experience of time really shapes the way we show up in our lives and how we feel about time and all of that. So I would love for you to unpack that in terms of what does the relationship with time really look like and why are we needing to really pay attention to that? How are people's relationships to time differently? Anything, anywhere you want to go with that.
Okay. Oh my gosh. I could literally talk for 5 days about this. So let's see where this goes. So, I mean, well, just in sharing my story, like, I mean, I think the number one thing for women around time is that we've been living in a very masculine situation for most of our lives. And a lot of the stories we've been told about time come from that, like, those from the patriarchy and from those masculine principles.
Yeah.
And number one is that, like, a man's hormones actually reset every 24 hours. And obviously ours don't, because we're on our cycles as you teach. And so it just had really clouded my version of time. So just in the beginning of my story, I share all the time about how it felt like 10 years of therapy when I changed my food. Like, it was just amazing to me, like, how, like, I thought it was going to take so long to feel that good that I like literally hadn't even tried, but it really took 4 days once I really stepped into it. And it was all based on intuitive hits, right? It was like, ask the guy across from me what he would do, call the babysitter, even though I didn't normally do, like, at that point when my kids were so little, it was either work or home. Like, there wasn't much in between at that point. So it was like, okay, this is the first time I'm going to do something extra. I'm going to go to this yoga class, like, talk to the teacher. Like, I'm such an introvert. This is not my normal, like, thing that I do. So it's like, but I kept just, like, trusting myself, which I think is a very feminine quality and really does start to bend time, because I could have spent 10 years trying to figure out how to make my body feel well. But, like, I just kept trusting what was coming in front of me. And you know, what the yoga teacher told me to eat was not freaking easy. It was actually really hard. But what was interesting is, like, intuitively, I knew she was the one to listen to, and she didn't know how to cook. So what she told me was actually doable to me, who didn't know how to cook. Like, she was just like a more of a nutrition food person, but, like, cooking wasn't her thing. The person I met when I was ready to cook, if I had have met her in that moment, I never would have taken a step, because it would have been way too overwhelming for me. So I think a big piece of it was like how our innate wisdom really starts to bend time and, like, and show us how, like, things are just possible that we didn't think were possible. Another really important part of it was that I guess I was more frustrated before the coffee cup day than I, like, really knew until I was able to do some self-reflection on it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that came from the diet culture of, like, constantly telling myself I would reset on Monday, and wishing that it would just, like, all be fixed, like, tomorrow, right? Like, just 85 pounds, just go away. Like, why are you here? Just go away. Like, and a real frustration with that and not understanding what was going on. And when I finally decided to follow this woman's information, one of the things I started also doing was a lot of work with mindset. And one of the first thoughts that I played with was, like, all right, it took me 5 years to get here, like, literally 5 years of being pregnant and nursing. So, like, what if it took me 5 years to get out? And there was something that was so freeing about that thought. And literally, it happened in record time. Like, the weight really did melt off, like, in months, but I needed that thought in order to take actions. So I think like, part of my relationship with time has really been about how my thinking always gets in the way. Really trusting the intuition and trusting the feminine. The other thing is like the part, like, so if we're thinking about time and we're thinking about this, like, planning, to me, all planning is deciding just in advance. And so the advantage that I think we have over men is that we do have this ability to tap into our intuition in this beautiful way and really get centered and calm. And we can make choices from that perspective. So instead of making a choice in a moment when, like, kids are screaming and we're feeling overwhelmed, or we're in a time in our cycle when we're feeling really foggy and tired, we can look at when is the best time to make choices. And start interacting with time in that way, which is so much more feminine. And then the other thing about time that your work so beautifully dovetails with is it's like, well, it's true. No day is the same in a 28 or 30-day cycle, right? And so it's like, if we really get into relationship with our bodies and with time, then we can start to see how doing different things at different moments makes so much more sense. And so productivity just has this new meaning. Like we can go back to the original meaning. Like I feel like productivity has become to mean that we're always doing stuff, we're always busy. But like the original meaning of productivity, like if you have a productive farm, the farm rested, right? Like that's like part of it. And so we can start to actually be in relationship with time in a way that makes sense. And then what happens is we really feel like we're bending it on a more regular basis. We're like, whoa, like, how did I do that so quickly? And it's just because we're in alignment.
Yeah. I love that because I have wrestled too, because I am working more in this feminine space and helping and people move into really leading from this feminine place of themselves.
Yep.
And in some sense, like when you listen to marketing and like different marketing coaches and supports that I've had, sometimes I've wrestled with the word productivity because it feels very masculine. And I love what you just pulled in though, is that like the reason it feels masculine is because of the stories and the meanings that we've attached to it.
Yeah.
And that all it takes is us reattaching a new meaning, a new story to what productivity is. And I mean, I say that in summit programs, like let's redefine what productivity looks like. But for me, I have really wrestled with that in terms of marketing. And I love that you just brought that in there because it is so true in the sense that it's almost like productivity has been like paraded as this thing of like being productive all of the time in the sense of doing all of the time and not looking at the whole productivity cycle of how do we produce and how do we grow and how does the earth grow and how does the earth replenish and like all of those seasons and all of those different parts is all a part of the productivity cycle. Doesn't mean that you're productive all of the time. There's different elements of productivity and what that looks like. So I really do like that. Like just in sense, like it's like stuff I've said in my programs and said I talk to people, but you know, it just clicks differently.
Yeah. So I love that. Well, and the other thing that while we're on the topic of masculine and feminine is, so I've done a lot of studying with some amazing mentors who are like sort of old timers in talking about masculine and feminine long before you and I were around talking about masculine and feminine. Yeah. And one of the things that's really stuck with me is that we need the good masculine and the good feminine, right? And the systems that we come from kind of are the bad masculine, right? I just want to like reiterate that like not all masculine is bad. In fact, I think we need a balance of energy. 100%. It's just that most of us are so far from understanding our feminine that like we kind of have to go in that direction before we map it back. But in the sense of time, like the actual structure of time and the 24-hour cycle is masculine. And we do live in that. Like, so we do have to like map things back. So like the to-do list is very feminine. And so I think that like when we're tapping into our intuition and like journaling and making lists, like that's beautiful and what many of us need to do more of. And then I think where we sell ourselves short sometimes when we stay so in that energy is we won't be able to fulfill a lot of that unless we bring it into time. But that doesn't mean that every day has to be the same. Like we can start to relearn about time, but we do need to bring a lot of that into time.
Yeah.
In order to fulfill our promises to ourselves that we're forgetting in our intuitions.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's one of the things that's really helped me in terms of listening to my cycle is helping me stay in integrity with the things that I've committed to, because I know at what point and where I'm going to feel more aligned to get something done and where I'm not. And so I was actually joking with some friends recently and they were like, Renae, you have such a hard time like pinpointing a time or like, so like when we're all getting together and I say, come over anytime after 5, I don't care. Like they're like, you're just so go with the flow. And I was like, I am in certain areas and when it matters, but if I put it on my calendar, so say I say, everybody come over at 5:00. If people aren't there by 5:00 or something shifts or something changes, like not that I get anxiety about it, but like I'm committed to that time. Yeah. And it becomes this like commitment. So if it's if it's something that I'm committed to, I will follow through and I will stay in integrity with it. And I expect other people to follow through and stay in integrity with it. And there's like a higher level of expectation because I've committed to it. And so I take those commitments very seriously and I stay in integrity with them. So knowing where my cycle is allows me to set those with much more integrity to where I'm going to be and how I'm going to feel so that I can do them and not feel like I have to cancel or do any of that kind of stuff. But also then it allows me to be in the flow on those other ones that it's like there's a little bit more fluidity. And so people joke
you're
about
creating structure around the time that you're doing and the time you're not doing. And I can vouch for you because we didn't record this podcast at a time when you had low energy and you knew not to schedule something on that day, which is so cool. Like imagine if we all did that.
Yeah. Yeah. It does. It makes such a huge difference. And just knowing like too, like even if you do have to do things on the days that you know it's not going to work out the best, then you allow yourself to be able to structure in your day around that to be able to really support yourself and know that that's where you're going to have to be. So Mia, this has been awesome. Do you feel like there's anything else that we have left out that you want to make sure you leave people with?
Just like, I just think we live in such an amazing time because I think we as women are really being called forward. And I think we're going to be so much stronger if we really can tap into everything Renae always teaches you and just coming at all this from a more feminine perspective, at least like if that's our foundation. And then obviously like we live in the 24 hours, but I just think we have much more of a chance of making this all work. And so it's just, it feels like such an exciting time to live. And I think with that, it can be a challenge, right? Like it's so simple to live by our cycles because it's so natural. And yet it's so far from how the rest of the world is living. So it can feel challenging. And I just think if we can be with both those things, it's going to be such a win-win.
Yes. And I will just put a little plug, like surrounding yourself with other women that are doing it too makes such a huge difference because it can feel, it is, I don't want to say anti-cultural or anti-society, but it is kind of against the grain in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so there is a lot of pushback in that. And so surrounding yourself with other women that are doing it, that are leading from more of this feminine place and kind of creating that community is really invaluable wherever you find that. Like Mia, I know has some supports and I have supports and the other coaches out there that maybe you resonate with more or whatever, but like find that community of people that are in that space and in that zone because it does make it so much easier when there's other women doing it too and they're championing right there alongside you and you feel like you're in it together. It makes a huge difference. Yeah.
And the one other thing that I'll share as we wrap is like, so I think I'm a little bit like just a few years older than you. My kids are teenagers and going off. And one of the things in that whole idea of community that's been so helpful for me is I definitely wasn't modeled how the cycle changes and how my relationship to time even would change like over time. And as my kids grew and as my hormones change and my body changes. And so in that community of like-minded people, just like always making sure you have someone who's like a little bit ahead of you who is also thinking about these things has been so helpful because I just like, I didn't know where to go or what to do. Like, I just didn't understand. And then as I had some of these wise women, so I think it's like, it's so great to have people who are right where you are. And then it's also great to have some people who are a little bit ahead, mostly age-wise, probably to understand how the cycle shifts because it shifts over time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Even looking the other way too, of like how we can help support our daughters and like the next generation is huge. Yes.
Oh my gosh. So fun.
So, yeah. Awesome. Well, Mia, where can people find you if they want to come hang out with you?
So the best place is just to go to our website, which is plansimple.com. We have a free course called From Overwhelmed to Ease that I think is a great place to start. And I do love to be on Instagram, but I have to admit that like, I try. Let's just say I try. I'm there when I can be, but really the way to integrate is to be on our email list and take our courses. And we have that one for free.
Yeah. Well, I will say I have actually been distancing myself from social media more and more lately too, and being okay with just like not here and there, but like less expectation on myself on how I show up on social media. And it's been so freeing. And I think
it helps us tune into our cycles more, right?
Yes.
It's like when we have the phone up to us, we're not necessarily so connected.
Yeah. It's just amazing how, in business and in social media worlds and stuff, like these experts are like, show up every day, be there every day. And I have in the past used my cycle to like batch and plan content and put it out there. And then in the last couple months, I'm just like, do I really need to do that right now? Or can I just fully just step back? And it's been amazing to kind of watch. Anyway, just a whole nother conversation.
A whole nother conversation, but such a good one. Anything that taps us into our bodies, right? It's what's so important.
Yeah. So awesome. Mia, thank you so much for coming on and sharing and being here with us. I know it has been great and wonderful. If you are listening and had any takeaway, insight that you are going to take forward, I know Mia and I would love for you to be able to reach out to us and let us know what that was for you, what stood out. Take a screenshot of it, tag us. I know both of us said we're just like distancing, but do the things and let us know that you're listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Alrighty, friend. It was such a pleasure to hang out with you today on today's episode. I cannot wait to do it again with you next week, so save the date. We'll meet here again. Until then, if you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on the podcast, letting us know what you love about this podcast. After you do that, submit a screenshot of that to support@renaefieck.com, and you will be entered in to be able to have one of our free spots inside of Your Cycle 101, our foundational program, letting you know the ins and the outs of how your cycle impacts you every single day. Alrighty, friend, I will see you next week.